Good morning, ladies. Here we are about to discuss the learning disabilities. We've got Arjumand Rafiq from King's School Al Barsha in Dubai and Lamya Al who is an IEC in Oman. And we also have the amazing Carolyn from Leiden University, who is going to give a little bit of more information about what Leiden is doing when it comes to students with learning disabilities and also shed some light on the Dutch law about such students. One of the things that we discussed during our initial meeting was actually what are students with learning disabilities and what kind of learning disabilities we are talking about. So let's start with Arjumand. Arjumand, when we're talking about students with learning disabilities, what do you have in mind?
It's everything from, say, dyslexia to ADHD. They may well have some sort of academic sort of, maybe they're not up to following a standard academic curriculum, but much more of an adaptive program. And then obviously we have students who have varying sort of physical disabilities as well. So it's a range of a range of disabilities, really. It's not just one particular type.
Thank you. And Lamya, what about you?
I would agree, same thing as Arjumand said. I don't have as much experience as, let's say, a school counselor would have when it comes to dealing with all these different students. But this year, I was exposed to a student with dyslexia and another student with ADHD. And as you're all aware, these are very, very different things. The scope of disabilities varies greatly. And I think for us as counselors to properly be able to guide our students, we need to also educate ourselves with these different complexities and the different needs of these students and become more aware of what's out there and how they can be supported during the application process to post-secondary education.
And Carolyn, what about you as university representatives? What are you students with learning disabilities?
Again, I'm probably echoing what my colleagues have said. You know, it's anything from ADHD or ADD, things like autism spectrum disorder, dyslexia, different types of chronic illness also fall under this particular category, depending on the student. When we're dealing about learning disabilities, and of course, all other disabilities are things that I'll talk about later too.
Thank you. And then maybe more of a question towards our counselors. What are the needs of students with learning disabilities when it comes to university applications abroad? Arjumand?
The learning needs. So it varies. Obviously, it depends on what the it depends on the student and their particular needs. So if we're looking at somebody who maybe has some learning difficulties, but is able to follow a standard curriculum, that can be to some extent a little bit easier. Obviously, it depends on where they might want to go, which country. Some countries we're able to see, you know, what the laws are of that land, and they'll have a lot more information about inclusion. And a lot of the universities in those countries may well be much easier to support. What I would do in that situation is try to link up with the university representative, and so that we can actually start those initial conversations from year 12, grade 11, before we even get to application stage, to make sure that the right support is in place. For somebody that might have a lot more needs, it may well be that we're actually having a discussion around other pathways other than university, because sometimes a university may not be the right place for them. But equally, if the university offers vocational pathways, we'd also have a look at that sort of information as well. So it's a range of whatever the individual I have in front of me would be needing in that sense.
Thank you for this, Arjumand. Lamya?
I think Arjumand covered it very eloquently. The only thing I would add is maybe what they would need from us as counselors. And I think what they require from us is basically for us to be aware of what's out there, because not only are there many difficulties or lack of information out there when it comes to the kind of information relating to support services or accommodations, depending on the kind of needs these students have, the access to that information is quite difficult. So even though as counselors, we more or less have a kind of timeline that we follow for students when it comes to the college application process, and it really starts from high school. I think for students that require specific help or specific services, we need to start much earlier, and we need to ensure really that all their paperwork, their assessments, everything is in place, nothing is lost, so we can ensure a proper transition from high school to universities. And we have to be very honest with families. When it comes to accommodations, it's not going to be the same as it is in high school, for example. In high school, it's still considered a bit of a bubble where these students have their families, their teachers, their counselors, everybody's there supporting them. When it comes to universities, the level of support varies from one institution to another. We need to very honestly and very clearly explain to families the various types of institutions that are available. We're looking at 2-year colleges, 4-year universities, liberal arts, so on and so forth. We need to explain all these various post-secondary options, the kind of support that's available in these universities. We have to be honest about, for example, maybe in school, certain accommodations can be made for free, but in universities, there could be an extra cost associated with that. So as counselors, we have a lot of homework to do when it comes to supporting these families.
And Lamya, during our initial talk, you mentioned that disability plays a factor for students not applying to university. Did you have such a case where you had a student who at the end of the day decided not to apply to university because of, being too scared that their needs won't be met on university level?
Well, I'm glad to say they did apply in the end, but in the beginning, it's that fear and that lack of knowledge about what kind of support they can find in university or what kind of accommodations are available out there. And also, don't forget, I do come from a part of the world in the Middle East where even talking about these kind of difficulties is not an easy thing. Families, sometimes it's lack of awareness. They're not aware that there is a problem. Quite often they would consider that maybe their child is slow, or they're not making an effort in school. So even getting to this stage where you realize that, hey, wait a minute, no, they are making an effort. They're not really slow, but there's something stopping them from reaching, from A to Z. Kind of assessing the kind of problem, that's one thing. Culture is another thing. Lack of awareness. You've got students who are not aware of what's available out there, but at the same time, there are universities who don't very clearly lay out the kind of services that they have. So when you have students not aware and universities not really explaining or talking about the kind of services that are available, you have a no-win situation, because everybody plays a part in something. I do have to say, some countries are ahead of other countries by leaps and bounds. I mean, in America, even though they do complain that there's still a lot to do, you've got nationwide policies that support learning disabilities. All the big universities have special support units, support departments. Some bigger than others, of course, depending on the funding of that university. You've got handbooks, you've got laws protecting students. I think one point maybe Arjumand can help talk about, but I did have a student who was worried about declaring the disability or talking about the disability while applying to university, because they were worried that it might be held against them. But I'm sure you, being exposed to so many different students, a lot more than me, might have something to add to that point.
Yeah, I always encourage them actually to note down that information, so that I always explain it to them that this is actually it's a positive, and that if the university is aware of what support they need, then that can be put into place, as they sort of move across from school to the university, and I sort of suggested, and I let them know that this is definitely, it doesn't impact the application in a negative way whatsoever. whatsoever. It only actually helps and supports them. If the university doesn't know, then they can't put into place whatever measures. And sometimes it could be something really simple, maybe just having regular access to a personal tutor. It could be something as straightforward as that. Maybe just letting them know what kind of software they might need, or on their laptop, that sort of thing. So it could be something really, really straightforward, and it can make a world of difference. And the university can then actually support the student in, if they do need a wellbeing counsellor, if they need additional kind of support in terms of. I can sort of talk about where my daughter went to university at Leicester de Montfort in the UK. The wellbeing team actually support the student to the point where they will actually check up on you on a weekly basis if that's needed. So there's a lot of, definitely it's always as positive, and I always try and sort of explain to them the positives and the benefits of that.
Thank you, Arjumand. Carolyn, let's turn to you for a while. In your practice, have you had these cases of being approached by counselors looking for more information about the support services that Leiden can offer them to help their students?
Of course, and also students. So I sort of echo also what my colleagues just said about sort of reaching out early, discussing it. And in the Netherlands, it does not factor into an admissions decision at all, because in the Netherlands, we sort of have our own protocol that's based in the accordance of the Act of the Equal Treatment of Disabled and Chronically Ill. So it's in the law here that students are protected in this way. And the university itself takes part in what's called the Barrier-Free Studying Project, which basically we're trying to make all students be able to have the equal opportunities for studying regardless of their situation. And that means that we work with our staff, we work with students, we try to promote awareness, we want to share knowledge, and look at making improvements for students in areas of things like digital accessibility, their exam facilities, physical accessibility if necessary, and building the expertise within our university in terms of having specialists per type of disability, essentially. So I mentioned some of them earlier, whether that's ADHD, ADD, autism spectrum disorder, dyslexia, these sorts of things. We have specialists in our what's called the Fenestra Disability Center that deal with these per disability, essentially. And so student counselors and advisors are available for students to be able to reach out, to be able to assist students for whatever the requests might be for their accommodations. Maybe that is extra facilities like a special study facility, or maybe even housing adaptations, support groups, maybe just extra time. It could be something simple as that, or extensions, software, in terms of those assistive technologies that might be needed. It could just be taking an exam in a different room than everybody else. There's all sorts of different things that can be put in place for students. So we have specialty people or counselors that have specializations within the Fenestra Disability Center that support us making sure that everyone has sort of equal access to those things. But what's important here, certainly in the Netherlands, and this isn't special to Leiden University per se, because of course all institutions have this law here in the Netherlands. But the Barrier-Free Study Project is something that a number of universities have undertaken to sort of go a step beyond. But students do have to reach out in order to access those things. So it's not automatic. So in the Netherlands, as some of you may already know, students are expected to really be, independent and start their own, sort of adult life here. So that means, they apply for their program, and their learning disabilities actually are completely separate to that. As much as they don't affect an admissions decision at all, it means that the admissions office isn't necessarily going to sort of talk to them about it and reach out proactively. The student has to reach out to the Fenestra Disability Center to talk about their issues, talk about what their needs are, to make sure that they have the proper documentation when they arrive, because that all needs to be sort of updated within the last couple of years, for example, to find out what's necessary so that they can legally provide what's necessary for them. And that's not a small task. So like my colleagues were mentioning earlier, the support starts in high school to make sure that they have what they need, that they're managing expectations, that they know that, it's not going to be exactly how it was in high school when they get here, even when they do get their accommodations. I think all those things are quite important, and realizing that they have to be their own advocate here in the Netherlands. So they have their learning disability or their learning challenges, they need to be able to reach out to our group or on other university campuses, their offices, and make sure they're getting what they need and advocate for themselves also all the way to their professors and study coordinators in their programs. So I think that's important to realize as well.
And Carolyn, just to clarify, these rules in the Netherlands, they're valid for both national and international students, right?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to clarify this for our audience to know that it's not something specific for the students. We'll be back at you with another question, but before that, I wanted to ask something. Lamya, when we talked with you, you mentioned about your student with dyslexia, and you mentioned how hard it's been for you to find information about the services universities offer. So what did you do in this case? And what would you like to see more, for instance, on the websites of universities when it comes to support services that will help your job as a counselor?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think I was lucky in the sense that my student really wanted me looking at universities in the UK. And as a backup, to look for universities here in our Gulf region. The level of information that I found there was a huge disparity between the kind of information I had access to when it came to universities in the UK. And again, I mentioned the UK only because that is where he was interested in going, and the level of information or the depth of information over here in the Gulf. Unfortunately, the level of information or the depth of information I found in the GCC was very minimal. It was only when you picked up the phone and maybe asked that they would speak about, okay, hey, bring the student over and then we can talk and see what we can do. Those kind of conversations. I can't say this is across the board. This is only based on the ones I got in touch with. Whereas the universities in the UK, not only was I able to find that information on websites because they had dedicated special support departments where they mentioned, but of course, all of them ended with the same thing, was that after the application and based on the specific needs, that's when we will be able to actually say what can be supported. But really, when I picked up the phone, there was no hesitation whatsoever, Nia, whenever I asked about accommodations for my student. It's like it was the norm. Whereas over here, it was not the norm. It was like I was asking for something different. And with the universities in the UK, it was the norm. And I have to tell you here, I was talking mainly to admissions officers. I called up international admissions offices. So I wasn't even talking to the specialists. And I found that they were very well trained in answering these questions. I think this brings me to a point that I wanted to ask Caroline about, if I may, and that's about tours. One of the things we encourage our students to do is to, visit universities they're interested in. And yes, tours are expensive, so maybe not everybody is able to physically go, but we also encourage online and virtual tours because since COVID, that field has blown up and the universities have done an unbelievable job with the kind of videos and virtual tours that they've done for their universities. But with students like the students we are referencing, the kind of tours they would need, depending on the severity or the level of support that they require, of course, varies. Like Arjumand said, there's very simple support that maybe only requires a bit of extra time. Whereas you've got a lot more that maybe they require specific programs or specific facilities in the university. Caroline, do you see universities offering specific tours, specialized tours for these kind of students? Or I know it could be because, like, let's say for every 10 or every 20 students you get, there might be one or two only that require that. So maybe financially, I'm not sure if it offers a lot, but what can I say to students like that if I'm encouraging, let's say my student is on the spectrum, but we needed them to visit a university. Would these kind of specialized, specially catered and tailor-made tours would be something that universities could consider to help out these students?
In the Netherlands, tours aren't typical, I'm going to say, in general. They're absolutely possible, and all of our universities do them. Some have them set into their programs, others. But in most cases, for example, at my university, these tours are done by the student ambassadors of the program that they're in. So you can't just walk into a Dutch university and say, hey, I'm here for a tour without having, reached out ahead of time. So in those kinds of cases, what I recommend for students is making sure they give us at least 2 weeks notice when they want to come, if it's not during an organized event, which is always the preferred option. And then looking at what their needs are. So we can tailor it to that student to a certain extent. If there's a lot of support needed, I might also connect them immediately with the Fenestra Center in our case to find out if we offer enough support for that student to study here. And I say enough because, of course, we endeavor to do that, but there are limits, of course, also to what is available. And so I would connect the student to say, hey, have this conversation first, see if we're the right fit, and we offer what you need, because it's not so much about admissions and that sort of thing. It's about the student making the right choice for themselves, because we have to be able to provide what they need. And if that's the case, then we can then also talk to the Fenestra Center about what could we do to tailor this visit, whatever is necessary. So a lot of times that's going to be absolutely bespoke, because we don't get a lot of requests that require that. So there won't be anything automatic on the website for that, but that's when people like myself can get involved and assist with that.
Thank you, Caroline. Arjumand, when we talk, you mentioned that you at your school have something called, if I've heard correctly, Team Around the Child. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes, so Team Around the Child, it's something that actually does happen regularly in the UK. And over here in my school, what we do is that any professional that's working with that child from FS upwards, so from kindergarten all the way until they graduate, you'd have whoever the professionals are working with that child, including the parents, to have regular meetings. So initially those meetings might only be once a term, and that's just really just a touch base. So that could obviously involve the form tutor. It would involve if there's any psychologist or any other specialist therapists that are involved with that child, and parents to meet up. Obviously in the summer term that you would be having conversations with whichever class they're moving up to next, and make sure those professionals are invited to that meeting. If there's more, if something has happened and something another meeting is needed, then you have those as as needed. But especially when it comes to any kind of transition period, so when they're moving from primary school to secondary school, and then obviously when they're about to take their options, GCSE options, or whichever curriculum they're at, so that all the way through everyone is having a conversation. This is noted down, and obviously as the child gets older, they will have a say in what's happening. So often what we'll do with the child, once they're able to start to articulate and express themselves, is to get them to fill up a little booklet about what does their world look like, and what are their hopes and dreams. So it's very, very simple, very straightforward, depending on the needs of the child again. And all the conversations are very much child focused, so that nobody loses sight of what's needed. But at the same time, if, for example, the child has to have some time off school, that sort of information is taken into account in terms of their academics and their timetable and any flexibility that's required. Likewise, if they can't be a part of the mainstream curriculum, then we have something called the ASDAN life skills program that they can follow. So it's adapted as they move upwards through school. We also incorporate work experience for them. So it might just be 1 or 2 hours once a week, or it could well be 1 day a week as they, move upwards through secondary school from year 10 upwards. So the program is consistently adaptive. It's flexible as per the needs of the child and as the child grows. And everybody who's involved in that person's life, is part of those regular meetings. And then what happens is that you've built up a bit of a file, a picture, and that can then be passed on to the university, the employer, vocational institution, wherever they happen to be moving on to, so that the supports can be continued in that way as well. So quite a lot of information, quite a lot does happen, but it just ensures that we've got as complete a picture as we possibly can, and a smooth transition at all the different levels.
And one question that came to mind now that you're saying this, and the question is both for you and for Lamya. What about the parents? How do you work with parents of students with learning disabilities? Do you need, to actually explain to the parents that their child can still go to university? How do you have these type of conversations with them?
That was something that Lamia did actually touch upon earlier on. So we sometimes can have a situation here in the Middle East where, for cultural reasons, sometimes we don't. The parents may not want to label their child, and sometimes because they think that there's a misconception that it could be a negative impact on the child. So and it does depend on. So obviously we have to kind of be diplomatic. We have to show that this is there for the child to help them. It's not because that child is lazy necessarily, or but if we have these conversations early on, it's for everyone's benefit. And so, you do have to have a conversation, and sometimes the conversations can be quite tough to have. And, they may not be so receptive in that situation. But if they can see that everybody is there for one common purpose, which is to help their child, then usually, more often than not, they will come round. And you'll then be able to start forming a relationship and actually, come into an agreement as to what everybody would like and what the outcomes are. So yeah, I don't know if Lamia's got anything extra to add to that.
I think you said it really well. And at the end of the day, it really does take a village. Everybody plays a role, whether it's the house, whether it's the school, whether it's the community, the surrounding environment. And like Arjumand said, sometimes these conversations are difficult, but I feel the more information parents are given, the more comfortable they feel with the person speaking to them. That it's a judgment-free zone, that we are not judging your child, that we are not labeling your child, as Arjumand said, the more accepting they become of finding a way forward. Because they do love their child. They do want their children to succeed. They do want to help them. And it's out of fear sometimes that, people get this mental block. And sometimes it does fall upon us to kind of walk them away from that scary line that they're in. But at the end, like Arjumand said, they do come around and they do want to help and they do want to support. And I find the more information we give them, the more comfortable they are, and the more they are there to help us support their child.
Thank you. And Carolyn, as we are moving on to finalize the session, can you tell us what additional information would be useful for you to receive from counselors and IECs like Lamya in order to understand better the situation of a student? And did you have such cases where only after a student was accepted, you realized that there are some problems with learning disabilities going on that you weren't aware of initially?
I'm sure that happens. I don't necessarily see the students once they actually are here on campus, unfortunately, but that's what their study advisors are for. So there are people who are in program to support students just regularly, regardless, for their program. And so students, if they're having challenges, can, make an appointment with that study advisor. The study advisor can facilitate connections to the Fenestra Disability Center or other, departments. Maybe it's just a well-being situation. Maybe it's a mental health issue. There's lots of different supports that are available. So that study advisor is really that connecting piece of a current student who maybe didn't know or didn't, tell us before they arrived, to help them get connected to the right people. So that's absolutely possible. And in terms of preparing, for me, it's more, if I'm aware of any aspect of this, I can facilitate and inform the counselors and the students ahead of time on what they should do. So it's not that I need that information per se, but I need it to be able to help so they can get connected to the right people on our campus. So the earlier that is, the earlier they can connect to the Fenestra Disability Center to have the conversations that they need to have to make a decision if my university is the right university for them, and that, in theory, we can provide what they need to thrive here. Because that's sort of that choice of the student that I mentioned earlier. It's one thing to say that we provide, the support and students are protected here in the Netherlands as a whole. But if we don't have exactly what they're needing or exactly what's going to make them feel comfortable, then that's part of their decision-making process. So I also want to make sure that those students sort of own their own advocacy and sort of own their own process. So it's not about just who will be able to have them here. It's about their active choice in that. So I think that that's quite important as well.
And Carolyn, do you know whether some adjustments to the curricula of a certain program can be made in order to respond to the needs of a student with some kind of a disability?
Well, every disability, or the common disabilities have a specialist in the Pedestrian Disability Center. So they'll assess whatever the situation is for the student, and then they will make recommendations for professors to keep in mind. I don't know, because of personal reasons and privacy reasons, of course, what exactly those changes would be. But in most cases, it's some sort of accommodation versus changing the curriculum per se. But there very well may be elements of that. It's just something that I'm not included in that end process. So it's really between the Fenestra Center and the student.
Thank you. And one last question, maybe to all of you, but mostly to the counselors actually. Arjumand and Lamya, in your opinion, does the support for students with learning disabilities stop once they're accepted? Do you need to be present during their transition period? Lamya, let's start with you.
I think, I don't know if us personally as counselors need to be present. Just like Caroline was saying, she doesn't need to personally be present, but I do firmly believe in establishing a proper transition for these students. It's not like just getting them the acceptance and then, off you go. It's more than one thing, actually. I think as counselors, whether it's Arjumand within the school or as an independent educational counselor, one of the roles we play is that we should encourage these students very, very early on to take on leadership roles. And the reason we should encourage them to do that is because, as Caroline very correctly said, they need to have ownership of their education. They need to be able to self-advocate for themselves once they get to universities. Again, but having said that, in addition to that, I believe that hand in hand, maybe as counselors, we need to provide all the information and make sure all the information is with us and provide the university with us, with that information, so that they are able to better serve the student. So not just letting the student apply and be done with it, but maybe a little bit of connection in the initial phases, just to make sure that all the information is there to enable everybody there to better support and help the student once they enter university.
Thank you, Lamya. Arjumand, back to you.
So yeah, I mean, I'm going to echo what's already been said. So I'll just give an example of a couple of students that I've worked with in the last few years, where one particular young lady, I connected her in the beginning of year 12. She wanted to go into hospitality, into luxury hospitality. So I connected her with a number of different institutions that offered those courses, and her and her parents were able to meet them here in the UAE when those university reps were here. And then what followed from there was that she was able to attend a summer school program in this case in Switzerland. Her parents went with her. They stayed nearby. She was actually on campus, so she was able to get a full experience. And from on the back of that, that was where they decided to apply. Another student who was sort of completing ASDAN life skills kind of program over here. It was a very different story. So here again, we were connecting with. I had quite a lot of searching to do in terms of what course he wanted to go on to, and to make sure that the support services were there in those particular universities. So that took quite a lot of time. In fact, the best part of year 12 to get him connected to the relevant people. But again, once the application was done, it wasn't a case of then, okay, we're good, we're fine. We did follow up. So, they do stay in touch. Parents are in touch and just give me little updates as well. So even though I don't need to necessarily support them in any way whatsoever, it's just making sure that there's a little bit of a continuation in that relationship. It doesn't just end once they graduate from school. But equally, yeah, as Carolyn and Lamya have said, whatever information or files we might have, we would share that. And often I'll either fill in a mitigated circumstances form as part of the application process, as long as I have permission from the student and parents, and just make sure that that's given to the relevant admissions officer, or whoever might be handling that application, so that continuation, carries on.
Thank you. And Carolyn, I know you said that obviously in the Netherlands, students are supposed to be quite independent once they're at university. But do you see the need for such type of connection, continuous connection between the student and the counselor and the parents as a transition period once they are already at university?
I think in the transition period, it can be helpful, of course, because they've built that relationship. It's comfortable for them in terms of that support. So I think it can be useful, but it's up to each student if they wish to do that. But making sure that they're making that bridge to the new relationships they need to make with our disability center and with their professors. So it is about sort of modeling. It's great that all that happens in high school, so it's really important because they can model their behavior on those relationships moving forward as well. So as long as they're prepared to do that, and then parents, of course, will always be involved in many cases, but also having those parents realize that at some point, in most cases, I would say their student or their son or daughter will need to function on their own in the real world, best case scenario, of course. So for them to be able to help them manage that over their studies is an important transition also for parents and students. I think this is for any parent and student, of course, but in these particular cases, to let their students try to be their own self-advocate and step in only when necessary at a certain point is I think an important piece. But the transition, yes, of course, they can remain in that process and keep everyone updated to a certain extent. Keeping in mind that in the Netherlands, the students are their own legal entity. So the university can only communicate with the student directly. So while we can all support around that, the student has to be the one that has the communication and sends the emails and those sorts of things. Parents can help, counselors can help, but they have to be the ones to actually do the work.
Thank you. And with that, we've run out of time. So I just want to mention for all the university representatives watching, if you offer this type of support services, feel free to get in touch with Lamya and Arjumand and discuss them further on so that they know how they can support their students and what they can recommend to them once applying to university. And for counselors who have these students right now, feel free to reach out to Caroline, discuss what Leiden is offering, and figure out whether this would be a safe space for your students. Thank you, ladies, for this session. I'm looking forward to seeing you throughout the rest of the conference.